Stories from Real Life, a podcast by engaging storytellers for engaged story listeners. Here's your host, author and journalist, Melvin E. Edwards.
Hello again, and welcome to this November 12th edition of Stories from Real Life. I'm your host, Melvin E. Edwards. Thanks for joining me on today's storytelling journey. Our guest this week is a pastor who uses the name Bonhoeffer's child on social media. To maintain his privacy, we will call him Bon today. Let's find out more about Bon before we begin our conversation that I promise will not be boring.
On today's episode of Stories from Real Life with Melvin E. Edwards, our guest today, Bonhoeffer's child, is the pen name of an American minister who writes about the intersection of religion, culture, and power. His opinions are informed by decades on the mission field, jockeying a pulpit and teaching in seminary. He now resides in the Midwest with his wife and 2 children. He can be found online at substack.bonhoefferchild.com or on X at Bonhoeffer's Child. Let's meet this week's Stories from Real Life guest and your host, Melvin E. Edwards.
All right, Bon, how's it going? Welcome to this week's podcast.
Thank you. It's going very well. I have no complaints other than the election, to be honest. But life is good. Life is good. I have no complaints.
That's good to hear. All right, so before we go any further, can you explain a couple of things? First, why do you maintain your anonymity online? And then 2, why did you choose Bonhoeffer's child as your moniker?
Okay. Well, there's a couple of reasons why I'm anonymous. The first one is that we went through a horrible scare when our children were very small. And as somebody that stalked us from online came to our house, would and I'm not going to get into the details, but would Photoshop pictures of our kids dead and all sorts of things, and stalked us online and in person for, about a year. And after that, I decided I'm done with being public about anything. It's not that I know that most people are good and most people are reasonable, but the unreasonable ones now are so unreasonable that I was never going to put my family in that kind of a situation. And the places that I work in, often overseas, are already bad enough. I'm not going to add more at home. Home's supposed to be a place of peace. I want my kids to feel safe. I want my wife to feel safe. There's no reason to bring more trouble in or borrow more than I have to. And I already borrow enough trouble in other ways with the things I say and the things we do. So I just decided to be anonymous. The online world is not reasonable generally. And then secondly, to be anonymous divorces anything I say from my person. So I'm able to speak without having to worry about how I inform it as a person or as a minister. Anything about me is completely separated. So then people can just concentrate on the message and the words. And it keeps that separate. Bonhoeffer's child, though, the reason I chose that is that throughout my ministry life, which is, we're talking going back into the 80s, Bonhoeffer was an example for me in ministry. Not just his methodology and his approach to things, but also, I would say, very much doctrinally, his personality. I have to admit that when 2016 happened, I became a little more combative is not the right word, but a little more unflinching about certain things. But I've always tried to follow that idea that the Christian life, above all else, is sacrificial, and that it is a life in community. It is not something that is supposed to be isolated. We're not supposed to be siloed. We are supposed to be in community with one another and in community with those that need Christ. And that is a prime ethos of Bonhoeffer's. And when I was in seminary, he was one of my focuses. I won't go into all the history of it, but he was one of my focuses that I've kept going throughout all my years in school. So it just seemed like a natural fit. I never intended to be online the way I am. I had a I had a very small, meaningless Facebook account that I traded pictures of family members, things like that. And then when everything changed, I felt like I just couldn't be quiet. I had to say something, even if it was just to get it off my chest. So I felt better. I had to say certain things. And so that's when I started it and kept going. And now here we are, 9 years later. And I'm still going for better or worse. I don't know if anybody appreciates it, but I'm doing my best.
Well, I appreciate you, and that's why you're here today.
Oh, I appreciate it. I have a real theory. I don't know what other people think, but I have a real theory that without truth being spoken, lies will always become the new truth. And so to me, Bonhoeffer's Child is a way to speak truth, even if it's a hard truth, even if it's something that's difficult to swallow. And it's not just so I can get it off my chest. It's not just so that I can try to change people. It's also so that I don't want the truth to die in silence. Somebody has to say something. Somebody has to always be presenting the truth, even if it's not acknowledged, even if it's ignored, even if it's pilloried. We have to be able to keep speaking it, because if we don't, within a certain amount of time, truth will become silenced and the lie will become the new truth. So if we stop talking, if we become silent, we've given up on the truth. That's when lies take over. So anyway, that's my take on that.
Okay, so what do you think of Eric Metaxas' characterization of Dietrich Bonhoeffer as a type of a Trumpian or a MAGA figure?
I would say it is incredibly insulting to Bonhoeffer's memory and to his lived example. I would say it is also one of the worst politically motivated hatchet jobs, and I want to say tradition motivated hatchet jobs. Metaxas essentially turned Bonhoeffer into an American evangelical, and not just into, say, a mainline evangelical, which you could include any broad spectrum of Lutherans into that would align more or less with the German state church that he came out of, if not exactly. He turned him into basically a neo-charismatic, neo-Pentecostal American evangelical, and tried to make him a totem for a specific theological tradition. And it's horrible what he did to him. He didn't even really go into primary sources, and it's inexcusable. I'm not a historian, but I've had my field intersects with it to a certain degree, and even with my understanding of that field, the work he did on that book is a travesty. He didn't even scratch the surface of what he should have done. And I always tell people always ask, what do you recommend? And I always tell people the thing you need to read first is Charles Marsh's book. It's accessible to everyone. It's easy to get. There's other books that are excellent. And then Bonhoeffer's Harlem and Bonhoeffer's Black Jesus are excellent. And they detail when Bonhoeffer went to Harlem when Hitler was in power, and his faith was profoundly changed by his experience with the Black community and the churches there. And Metaxas didn't grasp any of it. It was almost as if he just ignored it. He treated it like it was just a side issue, which I don't like to lump everybody into one group, but to me, that fits Eric's crowd. When it comes to anything about the Black community, they always minimize it and they always shunt it aside. That is something they're known for. That's just the reality of what they are. Maybe many of them are not openly or intentionally racist, but their world has been siloed to a degree that that's how they operate.
Well, I actually had a direct experience with Mr. Metaxas recently.
Oh, you did? Okay.
Well, not it was very brief. It was the briefest of on timelines. I tagged him on a quote from Bonhoeffer. So I thought sending Bonhoeffer's biographer a quote by Bonhoeffer would be useful.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
He blocked me.
No kidding. He's very touchy. He blocked me once when I mentioned something about one chapter in the book that was a little bit twisted, and I know that there's a lot of other people that have said the same thing. He's very touchy. And of course, we all saw the famous video of him knocking the kid when he was on his bike and smacking him. So yeah,
Yeah,
It's
that's what I call moonwalking to Texas.
yes. I still can't believe, honestly, I can't believe that he wasn't arrested over that. I mean, I can't believe it. If any one of us did the same thing, we would have had a cop, coming and giving us what for. But anyway, it is what
Okay,
it is.
so one more question about Bonhoeffer before we
Sure.
move on. So, for people who don't know who Dietrich Bonhoeffer was and why he's an important historical figure, can you give a brief explanation of who he was and
Yeah,
why he was
let
important?
me give a very quick one, because there's a lot of, it's easy to get lost in a lot of depth. Bonhoeffer was one of the ersatz founding members of the Confessing Church, which broke away from the German state church when Hitler took power. And there was a process there. There was some conflict within the German state church as Hitler tried to Aryanize the church. And there's, if you, the book I would recommend everybody read is Twisted Cross, or if they can get a hold of Solberg's A Church Undone. They fill in and inform the background and the history and everything else. The Confessing Church broke away when that came to a head, and it was that it wasn't even necessarily about all the issues that or all the things that were being changed in the German state church by the Reich. It was that the Reich was trying to redefine faith. And this is them being very reductive and very general. They were trying to redefine what Christianity was. And so they broke away to break away from that influence so they could return to what they considered to be a clean faith. And again, I'm being really reductive. He was one of those members, of course. He was, there's a lot of history he won't go into. He spoke out openly against Hitler. He was arrested. And then right before the war ended, and when what was likely a vindictive and punitive act, he was hung right as the war was coming to an end. And the reason why so many people look to him as an example is because the example of his life, and especially if you read his letters when he was in prison, the example of his life was one that was truly sacrificial, to the point of sacrificing his own life. You read some of his letters when he was in Flossenburg, and you see that this is a person who was fully human, who had all the normal fears of anybody in his situation, who had all the normal upsets, but he put the gospel and his example of Jesus first above all else. And, we always, whenever anybody that knows anything about Bonhoeffer, even in passing, always hears about cheap grace, his message of cheap grace, things like that. Bonhoeffer, cheap grace isn't really what he should be known for. It was the expense of his sacrifice. He lived what he preached, which is something we don't see much anymore. And it cost him everything, including his life. And when you read his letters, you see that he went through every human emotion, through fear, through grief, through wonder, and yet he still held fast to his faith. And he still believed that it had to be done not for himself, but for those that needed Christ. And that's something we sadly don't see a lot of these days. So that's kind of the short form of Bonhoeffer. There's a lot. I mean, we could spend all day talking about him. And
we may need to do that on a future date. Just have a Bonhoeffer episode, because he's one of my heroes too. So I would love to have a conversation.
Same.
Okay, so let's move back into a current timeline. Okay. So does the name Tony Hinchcliffe mean anything to you? And should others bother remembering his name, or is it only important to remember who invited him to speak at Madison Square Garden and who laughed at it and who laughed at his jokes?
Both. Actually, I would say all three. One, we should remember his name because it's important to know what the hearts of men are. And he demonstrated it. And he's going to say, well, I'm a comedian. I was trying to make people laugh. Well, out of the heart, the mouth speaks. His jokes are informed by his heart. And it tells us who he is. We should remember who invited him, because the person who invited him filled his campaign with people that had like minds, that matched him. So it tells us who he is. It tells us exactly who Trump is, that he would have him in. And I know there's a lot of people who say, well, he didn't really know. It was the chief of staff. It was this person, that person. That campaign is micromanaged to an extreme degree. There's no question. This is a person who is well known to be a micromanager, and who has, by the force of his own personality, attracted a specific type of person, whether it's people that are working for him, like Hinchcliffe, or whether it's his followers, which is why we should remember who his followers are. Because the people that laughed have shown absolute poverty of character and a soul that is probably on life support. Every single one of them that laughed in that arena. I never question a person's salvation, but every person that laughed at that, I would tell them that they have utterly failed in their discipleship and they've utterly failed in their praxis in every way. That was a joke that should never have been laughed at by anybody. It's simply beyond the pale. And when you dehumanize people like that, it tells us who you are. When you laugh at people being dehumanized, it tells us who they are. And when anybody willingly hires a person like that and surrounds themselves with people like that, Stephen Miller and all these others, it tells us what they are. It shows us what kind of person they are. And we need to remember it. We need to remember it. We need to burn it into our brains at the very least, so that if we ever have a chance to confront Tony Hinchcliffe and anybody else involved, we can ask them, what made you the way you are? What has damaged you so badly that you believe this is a valid way to speak about not only your fellow citizens, but fellow humans? Yeah, we should remember it 100%. 100%.
Okay. So sort of follow up to that. Do you think conservative Christians actually believe in the moral absolutes that they claim to profess?
Oh, yeah. I believe it. I think they're just schizophrenic and totally self-serving in every way. They absolutely believe it. You talk to them, they absolutely believe. I live in one of the deepest reds. Probably, I'd have to go back and check the stats, but in last year, we were considered the deepest red state by percentage of voters where we live. And it is the buckle on the Bible Belt. Everybody here, there's a church on literally every corner. Here, if you don't go to church, you are the freak. It's not the person that goes to church that's different. It's if you don't go to church, there's something wrong. And it's every denomination, every tradition. It doesn't matter. They're everywhere. And every one of them that are conservative believe that they are holding to what they consider to be Christian principles, and that they are living it out, and that they are expressing Christ through that. And they believe that their vote, say for someone like Trump, is expressing traditional Christian values, which is a definition. Oh, that's a silly thing to even discuss, because there's really no such thing as traditional Christian values. That varies by denomination, tradition, and things like that. But they truly believe it. What the problem is that they are schizophrenic and self-serving. They believe that their policy lusts and their desires, their societal desires, their cultural desire for power, they believe all of that is actually part of the gospel. It is actually part of the Christian faith. And what they have decided is that we can profess a specific type of value and then go against it with our vote or with who we ally with or how we act, so long as it gets us closer on a national level with that standard that we profess. So to them, well, I don't know. There's a lot of things we could use as an example. Let's say the people like Dusty Devers, who wants to outlaw divorce. And so they say divorce is horrible. We need families to be united. We need families to be together. Okay, never mind that when women had a very difficult path to divorce, especially in the past, up until when would things change? I think it was 1972 when a lot of the laws changed, but don't quote me on that. When it was so much harder to have a divorce, and there was no such thing as a no-fault divorce, the suicide rate for women was astronomical compared to now. And never mind that forcing people to stay together causes animosity. It can lead directly to violent abuse if there wasn't already abuse in the situation. People like Dusty say we should ban it. And so to them, they think that's a Christian value. We want families. Families are a Christian value. Great, mazel tov. To get that, they then stand with an adjudicated rapist, with a self-confessed molester, and they say, yeah, he's bad, but, And that but is where you get the dividing line between their two halves. So they have somehow created the silo in their brain. One side of them is, this is what I'm aspiring to have. The other side is, this is what I'm willing to compromise on to get it. And there are millions and millions and millions of them. And I don't even think most of them realize how bad it's gotten. I do believe nearly every single one of them, excluding the few really crazy people who truly are brainwashed to think that Trump is fine. He's never done a thing wrong. Everything that's bad that's happened to him has been a frame job for 50 years. And those people are very few. They exist, but they're really very few. Most Christians in the conservative world know exactly what he is. They don't care. He is a path to what they believe are Christian values and putting Christian values into America, restoring America. And we can go into there's a whole set of verbiage there to discuss. But they know it. They don't care. And so what they've done is they've compartmentalized in their brain so they don't have to confront it. Because normal people who have self-awareness will look themselves in the mirror and say, I believe in XYZ, but I'm compromising and choosing ABC to get there. There's something wrong. And they'll have enough self-awareness to say, okay, you can't take mud to wash a dirty car. It's not possible. And most normal people will have that self-awareness. To avoid having that self-awareness and to avoid the conscience speaking up in their heart, to avoid the conviction of their heart, the conviction of their spirit, they have completely compartmentalized it. And then they take it a step further, especially now after the election, and they have rationalized it. My compromise was good because he has won. And because he has won, we are now going to have a Christian America, quote unquote. And that now is their justification. That win is validation for their compromise. So now they can look themselves in the mirror and they can say to God, yes, we compromised, but it was all for the greater good. And I believe personally, nearly every one of them knows exactly what they're doing. They know who Trump really is. They know exactly what he's like, but they have made an idol of him and they have chosen him to be their tool. And when he ceases to be a tool, they will forget they ever knew him. In 10 years, the same Christians that are compromising in the name of Christian values, when he's dead and gone, when he's passed on, he's almost 80, he's going to be gone in 10 years for sure. When he goes, they will suddenly have collective amnesia. And if you ever confront them, they will say, well, we didn't have a choice. That will be their defense. And then they'll brush it off.
Wow. All right. So where do we go from here? And do you think the church has any moral authority left to lead us to where we need to go?
Oh, well, that's a difficult question. I think some of the church does. I think there are good pastors and good believers, good leaders who have stayed true to consistency. They have made sure that their life is exactly what they preach. They do exist. The problem is they're completely drowned out by those that have not. And they are the minority. The majority has chosen to preach one thing and live another. So there is some moral credibility there, but the voice of it is silenced. And it's only in certain circles that it's being listened to. The good thing about that particular thing is that those people who have been consistent in general, and I have a tendency to be really reductive. I don't mean to. In general, those who have been consistent are also those who are very engaged with community. And so they are demonstrating their consistency every day. They're showing that, yes, we believe XYZ, we are living XYZ, we are staying consistent. And so their voice will matter again. It's going to take a generation before Christians are trusted in America. My wife and I have talked about this, and she thinks it won't be that bad. She thinks it'll be a little quicker, but I'm convinced it's going to be a full generation before the church is recognized as any kind of moral authority. Unfortunately, that is going to cost a lot of people any relationship they could have had with Christ. And I think that's the way we need to approach it. When we talk to people that have compromised, it doesn't do any good to argue the politics. It doesn't do any good to argue about the immorality and the failures of their idol. It doesn't do any good because they don't care. He's a tool. They don't care about justifying a tool. He's a tool. They're going to use him as long as he's available. But the thing that we need to get back to in the future is explaining that all of this is an issue of witness. When in America, we have a promise that we can vote however we choose. Your conscience is your vote. You can vote your conscience. Nobody can stop you. Nobody can command you what to do. You have that freedom. That's wonderful. Every man's vote is theirs to do with what they wish. Their witness, however, is Christ's. No one owns their witness. Their witness is borrowed from the cross. And when you place witness beneath your lust for power, you are saying that Caesar is who you worship, not Christ. In every single instance. Every time your desire to protect your witness, either as an individual or collectively as a congregation, as a community of believers, or even as American Christianity as a whole, when you put your political, societal, and cultural desires above that, you are saying Caesar matters more than the cross. And there's no way around that. And so we have completely squandered it. And I say we because we are all Christians in America. We're all part of that, even though many of us didn't make that choice to compromise. It's going to take a generation. It's going to be 20 to 25 years. The way forward, though, and this is where I lose some people. The way forward is, first, we need to be vigorous in our leadership training, whether it's in seminary, whether it's in parachurch organizations, whether it's just congregational leadership training. We need to be extremely rigid and vigorous, that we teach that your profession of faith should match the way you act. We have to drill that in. That has to be a primary importance. That if you profess XYZ, you need to live XYZ. If you profess XYZ and you vote ABC, that is a failure of consistency. And we need to preach against that we teach against this ends justifies the means. The ends never justify the means. If the ends justified the means, the gospel would not have happened the way it did. The gospel happened the way it did because there was a certain set of things that had to happen. God had a specific plan for man, and we see the walk through that plan all through Scripture until the coming of Jesus. If it wasn't for that, the second Adam and Eve fell, everything would have changed, and God could have righted the boat right then. I mean, but people think that, as long as we get what we want, it doesn't matter how we get there, and we have to train that out of all the leaders that are coming. The older leaders, I think it's too far gone. They are so steeped in their compromise, it's better just to write them off. Some of them are going to come to their senses later. Some will repent when, and again, I'm not wishing anything on anybody, but when Trump does finally pass away, they're going to suddenly wake up and be like, well, maybe I shouldn't have, cost myself a little bit of reputation. There's going to be a few like that, but most of them are never going to confront their act of compromise. And so focus on the younger generation. Focus on those and teach them. Second, we need to hold every believer who falls in that group, that compromised, accountable. Now, we don't have the ability. We're not leaders of every person. I don't pastor every person. They're not all under my aegis in some way, whether it's in a classroom or a congregation or anywhere else. So we can't actually discipline them, but we can remind them of their compromise, and we can tell them we know who they are. And the reason why this is important is that every one of them knows their compromise. Every one of them is aware that they had to take a bitter pill to get what they wanted. And we need to be constantly reminding them that we know they compromised, and we know that what they've done was wrong, and that we're not going to forget it. And I know that sounds harsh. I'm not trying to say we need to slam them. We need to, drag them every day. But we need to tell them that we know who they are, we know what they are, we know what they represent, and we are not going to let it go. Now, that doesn't mean you can't forgive them. They've hurt a lot of people. They're going to hurt people. Their choices are going to hurt countless people in the years that are coming up. And we're going to have to engage in extreme acts of forgiveness for that. But forgiveness does not mean that we do not hold them accountable. They need to know that we recognize who they are. That's part of forgiveness, is saying, we understand that you've done wrong. We're forgiving you, but we need you to know that you've done wrong. It's not simply ignoring it. You can't ignore it. You have to point it out. So I think if we can do those things, we have a viable path forward, but it's going to take us a generation. The American church has completely burned its credibility to the ground. There is none left. And the few that have it, our voice is small enough that it's going to take years for them to be heard. It will literally take probably an entire generation growing old and passing away before much changes.
Okay, well, my next question has a little bit of a monologue before I actually get to the question. But I want to touch on a couple of points that you just made that I actually happen to disagree with a little bit.
Okay, please.
All right, I don't think most Christians think I don't think they're aware they made a compromise.
Okay.
I think they believe they made a stance, a principled one. And then number two, I don't think Trump is going to be forgotten that quickly. And I use as my example Confederate statues. Being erected decades after the end of the Confederate War.
Right.
After the Civil War. Rather.
Yeah. Do you want me to respond to that?
No, go ahead. Yeah.
Okay. I wasn't sure if you were done. I don't disagree per se. When I say that I think they're going to forget Trump, I don't mean they're going to forget who he is and they're going to lionize him. But I guess the best way to put it is this: when he goes, whatever that is, and that spell of him as a person is broken. Now, MAGA is going to go on. America has changed. MAGA is going to keep going in some form or another. It's going to call itself different names, but the ideology is it's a monster that is out of control. We're never putting it back in the bottle. But when he's gone, he'll be lionized. But what I mean is that there will be people who will suddenly decide we don't want to be associated with him as closely, because when he is gone, more truths are going to come out. I mean, you look at the last 9 years, it's been like, and one of my biggest gripes are all these authors that have all this great information and they have sources that were right with him and they hold on to it for years instead of going out and talking about it. If Bob Woodward had said half of what he knew 5 years ago, we might not be where we're at now. You know what I'm saying? And so all these guys sit on stuff until it's good for them to sell a book or a newspaper or whatever. When he is gone, all these little secrets are going to come dribbling out. And it's going to be worse and worse and worse and worse and worse. And so what's going to happen is people are going to start trying to distance themselves and say, oh, well, and then they'll start going into, well, I had to because. And so I don't, like I said, I don't disagree with you, but I think there's some nuance there. Okay. Personally. And as far as the other, I do think that people really believe they're taking a stance. I agree with you, but I also think that they have siloed them. And this is just me, and I am happy to disagree. And I know, no problem. I do think that most of them are very aware that it's not possible for him to be totally clean. It simply isn't possible. He is a human being. His own words convict him over and over and over. This is not a man who's been shy of talking about himself for 50 years. And so I think they know, but they just silo it so they don't have to think about it. And as long as it's siloed, it doesn't bother them. So I guess the best way to answer that is I don't think you're wrong. I just think there's some nuance there that we could, inform more of and discuss more. But okay, I get it. I get where you're coming from.
I appreciate that, and then that leads me into the monologue that I referenced.
Okay, please.
Which also touches on those topics. So one of the things that has personally bothered me the most about this recent campaign is how many white evangelicals who tried to convince people that supporting Trump was the only Christian position to have. And it bothers me for two reasons. One, there is no Christian position or requirement to vote for either party or candidate.
Right.
And then number two, only a white person can say that Trump is the default position for a Christian. And history doesn't allow for that type of an option for someone like me.
Right.
Trump's orbit is just too toxic and suffocating for those minorities of all types and also immigrants.
Right.
So that's my
okay.
go
Yeah,
ahead.
I agree with you 100%. I think Trump is definitely for lack of a better word, he is definitely the white Christian candidate. And like you pointed out, minorities know better. They have been on the receiving end of his racism for decades. And then the idea that he is the Christian candidate, like you said, only a white person could say that because he doesn't represent anything remotely close to Christ at all in any way, shape, or form. He never has ever in his life resembled anything close to Christ. And so when you look at that and you realize that he is the default white Christian candidate, you realize how much of white Christianity is underpinned and undergirded by racism. And it has been from the very beginning. It has been the history of America is bloody with it. And they have now been able to convince themselves, oh, well, the Civil War is long gone and Civil Rights 65 came along. Everything's great. But those same people that fire hosed protesters in the 60s and the 50s, those same people are the ones that train the leaders of today. And a lot of those same people are still alive. And nothing has really changed. Nothing. And they don't realize it. They don't realize that is part and parcel of American Christianity. And as many people are trying to change it, they're resisting. And it's going to get worse as the demographic shift happens in America over the next 25 years. We're going to see far worse. I think we're going to see overt white racism in the church, and it will become a matter of doctrine. We've already seen, in an ersatz way, we have seen people preaching or teaching the idea that American culture is inherently white Christian culture. And that's more of a fringe thing. You see that from some of the fringe guys. Was it Eric? What's the guy's name online? Eric
Erickson. Eric Erickson.
Yeah, Eric Erickson. Yeah, and then you have Eric Kahn and all these other guys, and of course Doug Wilson with all the Stephen Wolfe stuff. That it's all white supremacy, Christianity, and Christian nationalism, all dressed up in 18th century thought. This is going to start becoming mainstream. Is what will happen. And yeah, I'm with you 100%. It is something that I don't think many people have confronted. I don't think they have the tools to confront it. I don't think they have the knowledge to confront it, which is sad. A lot of people are so badly educated. They literally do not understand half of American history, let alone church history. They simply don't have it. I have talked to people and mentioned episodes that are well established, well recorded, and well taught today. Some of the pogroms that happened against Black community, especially during Red Summer 1919 and then later in 1920, they have no idea they even happened. None. They have no idea. Like in my state, most of the big chapters of the KKK were part of churches, and they would meet in churches. This wasn't something that was happening in the backwoods. They were meeting in churches. And the leadership, the governor of our state for 10 years was one of the biggest leaders in the KKK of our state back in that era. And this is just how they don't have any idea. They have no concept of it. And so then when they start seeing people talking about minorities and immigrants and all these people coming in, they start seeing this as an attack on their identity, on their community. They don't even realize that they have been sucked into racism. A lot of them. Now, there are those that are very intentional racists, no question. But a lot of them don't even realize they've been sucked into it. And then suddenly they have been transformed into something that 5 years, 20 years before they would have never wanted to be. But here they are. And yeah, I'm with you 100% on that. I'm with you 100% on that. 100%.
There's so much stuff that I want to talk about, and it just keeps expanding the more we discuss this. So I want to try to keep going in a straight direction.
I tend to go rabbit trail. So
and that's okay. That's okay. So some of the things that we're talking about today, I've talked about. I've written 2 books about my family's history in Texas, and
excellent.
The stories are genealogical, and they're also historical as they relate to events that were occurring in and around my family, around where they lived and grew up and experienced American life from the 1818 until now.
Okay.
And so in my second book, which the cover of it is right over my shoulder here, The Strength of a Thousand Suns. And I talked about the wall, which Trump talks about a lot. And I use it sort of metaphorically, the wall, and using air quotes to think of a border wall as using this as a metaphor, that includes rabid anti-immigrant sentiment.
Oh, yeah.
It's an us versus them attitude that never ends well.
Yeah.
So
always.
history has shown us that all walls built to keep them out will eventually be used to keep us in.
Yes, I read that when you sent me that. I read it, and that is a very profound truth. Every wall doesn't just keep people out; it always keeps people in. Every wall, and they don't even realize they become prisoners of their own fear. They just don't even know it. The thing that is tragedy to me about it. Oh, were you done? I'm sorry. Did I cut you off? Were you done?
No, I was done.
Okay. I just want. The thing that is a tragedy to me about it is that in America, where I'm trying to think how I can put this cleanly, the same people who insist that America is a Christian nation, that it was founded on Christian principles, that it is a bastion of Christianity in the world and meant to be a blessing to the world for Christ and bring people to Christ. And we can go on and on with the descriptions. The same people who believe that are literally salivating to put up a wall to keep out those who need Christ. And not only that, but they're keeping out people who are Christian brothers and sisters. Most of the people who come on the southern border that are immigrants from Central and South America are Christians. And they are literally doing everything they can to keep them out. They're not just excluding those that they consider the other for any other reasons, creedal especially, or race. They are also keeping out those who are literally their Christian brothers and sisters. And they are trying to keep themselves in behind this wall for a safety when they are people who profess that America is Christian. Why would you try to keep people out? Your entire goal as a Christian is not to get yourself to heaven. Your entire goal as a Christian is to bring Christ to those who need him. If Christians, how can I put this? This is a better way to put it. If our purpose as believers was not the gospel, the second we found the cross and we came to that full understanding of Christ as Lord and Savior, we would instantly be popped up to heaven and be done. If God's goal is to bring people into his presence, the second they acknowledge Christ, we would be in his presence. It's that simple. We're not. Why? Because we are the hand of God on earth. We are the mouths of God on earth. We preach the gospel. We demonstrate his character. We demonstrate his love. And that's our purpose. And so here are people that literally profess that America it's Christ-based. George Washington had a Bible open 50 times when he was writing the Constitution. All this nonsense that isn't true, and I wish somebody would take David Barton out and give him a good swift kick in the tail. All this different stuff. And so they're proclaiming all this, but they literally live the exact opposite because they do not understand what it means to be a Christian. They have identified, many of them, that Christianity is a cultural force, that it is a societal thing. It has nothing to do with serving God. It has nothing to do with being a living example of Christ. And so they don't get it. And if you try to convince them of it, they will fight you tooth and nail. It's amazing. I had a conversation with somebody yesterday trying to explain why the issue with the election isn't partisanship. I was talking to somebody online. The issue with the election for me isn't partisanship. I was GOP since Reagan until Trump came along. I mean, I just that's where they lost me. And I had been writing in my vote for a long time prior to that because I just found the political process to be fraught with compromise. That I felt better being above the fray. And where I live, my vote doesn't matter. It wouldn't matter which way I voted. It doesn't matter. I'm being overrun by 6 million people. There's not even a fraction of people like me in this state, so it doesn't matter. it blew my mind that there was this massive change, and no one could see it. No one could see it. And anyway, I just that's why I went into just writing in. But they're voting directly against what they profess to be. And so the issue with the vote wasn't partisan. It's not, oh, I don't like this policy, that policy. And that is an issue that everybody has to consider. People have policy desires. They have a direction they want the country to go. That's okay. But the issue is the witness. They destroyed Christian witness completely. They utterly destroyed the voice of the gospel in America. And what could have been a national, can you imagine? And this is, I like to daydream about this sometimes. I like to imagine what would have happened after the first tape of Trump laughing about sticking his fingers into women without consent. When that first tape came out, because, he talks about, well, I just grab them. There is no way to grab a woman like that without sticking your finger in them, period. And I'm not trying to be crude. It is horrible what he was admitting to. The first second that tape came out, imagine what it would have been like if every Christian leader that had been slightly voicing their support for him had said, you know what? This is against everything we stand for. He has not repented. He has not shown any character change. We cannot support this. And they don't have to say, we want to vote for the other side. They don't have to do that. They can abstain. They can write in. There's other parties. There's not just Democrats and Republicans. And a lot of people don't even realize that, but there are other options. Imagine what the voice of the gospel would be in America right now, 9 years later, if they had said, that's a bridge too far. We will not support immorality because we have to stay true to our profession of faith. Can you imagine what that would have done for the reputation of the church in America and for the gospel? Because then people would be able to look at them in a way and say, you actually practice what you preach. Now, there's a lot of other issues that, to be discussed that they have goofed up on too. But that would have been an amazing act of consistency. And what drives me crazy, and my poor wife has to listen to me gripe about it all the time, is that the lack of consistency burns witness. And the gospel, above all else, is a living embodiment of consistency. From the moment God told Adam and Eve, I will trod the snake. This is going to be over. I'm going to restore this. I will send a savior. From that moment, throughout the Bible, what we see is a consistent acts of God to bring that about. And all that consistency is culminated in Christ on the cross. The cross is the ultimate symbol of consistency. And when you are not consistent in professing the cross and the way you live, you say to people, the cross isn't real. It doesn't matter. It's not real because I'm saying one thing, I'm living another. Therefore, everything I preach is a lie. And I just, it really just burns my brain up to think, what if they had the guts to say too far? I mean, imagine liberty. You have Jerry Falwell Jr. Now Jerry Falwell Jr., we all know his story and the weird stuff that he and his wife were into and everything else. Imagine if the people that knew about it, and people knew about it at the school before it became public. Imagine if somebody had stood up and said, this is what's going on. We need to deal with this and deal with it publicly. That would have been consistency, but they didn't. They hid it. Same thing with Trump. They hide or brush away. They excuse or ignore everything he does, and they have shown themselves to be utterly inconsistent, and it destroys the voice of the gospel. And they don't grasp it. For me, it really has nothing to do with partisan issues at all. I do have political opinions. I've got strong ones. I've always been very political. I'm vocal. I'll debate anybody all day long about policy issues. But those policy issues mean nothing compared to the voice of the gospel. Every policy desire I have, every political opinion, every view I have of our society or culture means nothing in the face of one soul. And they have not just sacrificed one soul, they have sacrificed countless that will never hear the name of Jesus or ever believe on him because of their lack of inconsistency that was shown by that vote. And it is a crime. I don't profess anything on anyone, and I'm not speaking for God, but I would not want to be them to face God when he says why when they face him. And however they rationalize it, not my problem. I'm not their judge, but I couldn't do it. I could not look God in the face and say, yeah, I believed all of this, but I did the exact opposite. Sorry. I couldn't do it. And, you know, I heard somebody online call you like, well, you're just a moral scold. Well, no, I'm not trying to be a moral scold. I'm trying to be consistent because I know how inconsistent human nature is. And we have to fight to be consistent as Christians because we are subject to human nature. It's something, it's a daily battle we have every day as human beings to be consistent in our profession of faith. It's not easy. It's hard for everybody, but we have to do it. And they decided it's too hard. We're not going to do it. Anyway, I didn't mean to go on a rant. I'm sorry.
Yeah,
I'm
that's
sorry.
Okay. That's okay. So I want to share some personal anecdotes here, and it relates to something you just said, and we talked a little bit about this before we started recording. One of the conclusions I've arrived at is something that I've been struggling with to understand for years, but especially the last few weeks, and why this election and why this candidate, now this elected leader, bothers me so much.
Okay.
And I think it's because having grown up in a Christian home, having gone to church my whole life, and as an adult from high school on, having gone to mostly white churches.
Right.
These were people I trusted. I expected to trust. I learned from, and hopefully they learned some things from me. But this feels like I've lost that reliability because I just don't know if I can trust the people around me anymore. And I want to talk about a couple of specific incidents. Earlier this year, I left a church that we had been a member of for about 3 years after moving back to Texas.
Okay.
And the pastor had done a sermon in which he said wokeness, that was his term, wokeness was the biggest threat to America. And so after church, I asked if I could talk to him. And I told him that term, his use of that term bothered me.
Right. Oh yeah, absolutely.
And so he said, can we go out sometime and talk about it? So later that week, we met at a restaurant for dinner and we talked about it. And first I started explaining to him the definition of that term from as a perspective of a Black person.
Right.
And that I figured it probably had some different, it was like a colloquialism that he may not have grasped. So I said, this is being aware of something. You're awakened to a new reality of which you weren't aware before. You woke up, basically. His response was, I didn't know what I was talking about.
No. Okay.
I didn't know what I was talking about. And and then the other term that I've heard used less in the last few weeks, but a lot in the last year, DEI.
Oh yeah.
Diversity, equity, and inclusion. And it's personally offensive to me because people use that as a way of minimizing my and other minorities' accomplishments.
Absolutely.
Without having any idea of my level of education, my career trajectory, my accomplishments, my successes and my failures, and the lessons that I learned from that to create a different type of a success.
Right.
They write it off as something that was handed to me. And I didn't earn it, which is what they say DEI stands for. Didn't earn it. And that is profoundly insulting.
Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah, well, one, I'll say this. I am very sorry. I mean, I can't apologize on the behalf of anybody but myself, but I am almost bereft with sorrow sometimes at how minorities in America, particularly Black people, have been treated in that way, especially concerning CRT and DEI. It is offensive in every way, shape, and form. It is an affront to every type of decency out there. And boy, I want to say so much. I'm going to start with this. I'm going to back up to what you said at the very beginning before addressing that, because I do have a thought about that. Your point about not being able to trust people. I just had this conversation with my wife, because my wife and I have been talking about everything that's been happening politically, and she of course is less of a firebrand than I am and tries to be more measured. which I'm grateful for, because, you can end up blowing yourself up sometimes, if you're playing with fuses. And so we're talking about this issue, and I was trying to explain my heart, and I came to the exact same conclusion as you. It's like, I no longer can trust any Christian MAGA at all. Can I love them? Absolutely. I have a Christian MAGA in my immediate family, and I love them. I mean, he is the best father-in-law I could ever ask for. You couldn't ask for a better man, as in character, in action, but he is completely sucked into that neo-charismatic far-right world. Lance Wallnau and Hank Hanegraaff and all these other guys that are just completely crazy. And no, not Hanegraaff, Kuhneman. Sorry,
I was gonna say, I haven't heard Hank Hanegraaff's name mentioned in a long time. The Bible Answer Man.
Yeah, the Bible Answer Man. I used to listen to that in Chicago when I pastored up there. Hank Kuhneman. Sorry, my brain just took a dive. Anyway, so he's been sucked in by that, and he's retired. He's relatively elderly, and so he has nothing else to do. He listens to all this stuff, and it has completely consumed him. So I get how it happened. And like I said, he's an excellent man. And I was trying to explain to her, I was like, my love for him does not change. But when it comes to issues of integrity or morality, I could not trust anything he says anymore, because what he professes and what he does is two different things. And that's how I feel about every MAGA Christian. I don't want to demonize them. I don't want to burn them to the ground. I don't wish any ill on them. But their voice is now meaningless on many subjects. If they want to come talk to me about how the weather is, how the Yankees are playing, if they want to come talk to me about basic things, fine. When it comes to anything that involves a moral issue, an issue of integrity, or an issue of character, it's over. And maybe my heart will soften on that in time. I hope it does. I don't like to feel that way about anybody, but as of right now, and I expect for a while, very long while, I can no longer trust them ever. I will never look at them the same way. It's to the point that if I had to have a youth worker and they were hardcore MAGA, I don't know that I could trust them around the kids, because if you're going to vote for a rapist and a guy who is a self-confessed molester, what else are you going to excuse? Doesn't mean I think they're going to do something bad. I don't think most MAGA Christians, I don't think, are going to do anything bad directly or intentionally. But if they're willing to excuse or ignore it when it benefits them, and that's why they excuse and ignore it, it benefits them to make that choice, what will they excuse or ignore later? And the sky's the limit. They have now told us there is no limit. They have now told us that stealing top secret documents from the government doesn't matter. They have now told us that rape doesn't matter. They've now told us that felonies don't matter. They've now told us that sleeping with a porn star doesn't matter. They have now told us that being a serial adulterer and cheating on every one of your wives does not matter. They have told us that engaging in racist rental practices and getting caught by the Department of Justice for it twice does not matter. They have told us all of these things do not matter. So how can I ever trust them ever again when it comes to issues of character or integrity or morality? Do I want to feel that way? No. Do I hope it changes? Absolutely. But I don't think it can until they demonstrate change. And yeah, I'm with you 100% on that. Now, when it comes to the other issue, I'm going to give a little speech here about this, because this is something I actually talk about sometimes, and it's a big deal to me. The issue with CRT and DEI that I live in constant anger about, the way it's been treated. And like you said, when the pastor told you don't know what you're talking about, you are a member of the Black community who coined that term. This is a term with a long history. It has a well-established denotative definition that people know. There's no question here. This isn't something that was just pulled out of the air. And for him to say to you that you don't know what you're talking about it borders on, it almost feels like you're being physically slapped, and that now you don't matter. And I even though I have never been through that, I understand completely how I think I understand completely how that must feel. And it fills me of sorrow and anger at the same time, because, and I bring everything back to the gospel because that's just what my big focus is. CRT and DEI are the gospel in a secular form. Now, do I mean they save? No, I don't mean that at all. But they mirror the effects of the gospel. What is CRT? At its most reductive, to make it simple, it is a lens to look at systemic issues, systemic laws, systemic institutions, and identify where racism exists. It looks at the system and says, okay, this law has racial components that need to be dealt with. This institution has racial components that need to be dealt with. These are racist institutions or laws. They have to be corrected. That's what CRT is at its root. Now, people add a lot of things onto it, but that's what it is. The gospel tells us there is a systemic issue in human life. It is sin. It identifies the root cause of problems in the institutions of humanity, and that is sin. That is CRT. DEI is literally the act of Christ on the cross. It is Christ coming to say no longer no one's, I can put it this way, this is a better way to put it. No one is limited. And I'm being really loose with some of the wording here. Diversity. There is no one that cannot come to the cross. Everybody can come to the cross. Doesn't matter your creed, doesn't matter your race, doesn't matter your background, doesn't matter your family history. Everybody can come to the cross. Equity. No man can save himself. Only Christ can save us. We are saved by Christ alone. What does that mean? It means that he gives us the equity of salvation, inclusion. We are brought to the table of Christ and raised up to be with him. We are sitting at the table with him, not beneath him, not above him. We are sitting beside him. And how can people look at these issues and treat them the way they do? I just can't fathom it. It tells me that they don't have an understanding of the gospel. It tells me that they have a disdain for those that are not like them. And it tells me that they don't know how to, I don't want to be mean here. They don't know how to be sacrificial enough to raise up another, even if it costs them something. People's like, well, it's not fair if we have DEI policies, then, if there's 10 people hunting for a job, it might go to a minority. So what? Why do you not rejoice at a minority that has been trained and qualified and has reached that place that they are able to fill that position? DEI does not mean that anyone is just brought in off the street. They still have to have the same qualifications. And they've mutated that and lied about it. You see this when Boeing happened and everybody's looking at Boeing and saying Boeing is the result of DEI. How offensive is that? They are attacking like you said, they're attacking the education. They're attacking the successes of people. Why are we not celebrating? Why are we not celebrating the fact that in American life, minorities have been constantly mistreated and shunted aside for centuries? Not just the Black community, immigrants that come in. Look at what happened in Ohio. People have been mistreated intentionally for centuries. And now we are finally changing our laws and our culture and our society. Little by little, we have a long way to go, but we have made strides. We are finally changing things to bring equality up. And if that means that has to come by equity sometimes, sure. Make room at the table for extra people that have never had room at the table. We should be celebrating that. Look at how great we are changing as a society. We are making room for those that never had room. We are bringing our community together. And instead of celebrating that, they pillory people and they attack them and they absolutely warp the definition. I'm sorry, I don't mean to rant, but it is an issue. It is such an issue to me because both of those subjects mirror the gospel perfectly. And I don't understand how they don't see it. It's almost as if that same pride that drives them to look at themselves as better than everybody else is the same pride that must somehow tell them that as a Christian, they're better than everybody else too. And when you have that attitude, you can't be a reliable voice of the gospel. You have to understand that you needed the gospel too. Anyway, I'm going to start rambling there, but that is such an issue for me. Such an issue.
Well, I think it should be. And just to close that subject, he preached the very next Sunday. I was back at church, and he included segments of our conversation in his sermon, which I found a violation of privacy. He didn't mention my name, but I knew who he was talking about.
Yeah.
My
No,
wife
absolutely.
He was talking about me because I had told her about our conversation.
And so he was, I don't want to be cynical. Okay, I do want to be cynical. I'll be cynical and say this. He was probably doing that to silence you. That is how I would approach it. I would look at it and say, he's telling you, you're wrong. I'm going to make an example of you. And it's not only a violation of privacy. And it's absolutely contrary to all pastoral ethics. Absolutely contrary.
Yes, absolutely.
There is no justification for it at all. But I think I would take it personally. If I had been in your position, I would take it as he is trying to tell me, stop telling me anything. I'm putting you.
And so I left that church. So
I understand.
I
would do in your position. Yeah. I would have done the exact same thing in your position.
Okay, so let's get back to Christians and politics here.
Okay.
A couple more questions. So do you think personally that for Christians who voted for Trump, is it worse not knowing all of his crimes or his violations of constitutional norms, or that they knew and didn't care, or that rape is less disqualifying for them than the inflated price of milk?
Ooh. Okay. I will say number 2, and I'm going to give a caveat on number 3. I think they don't care. I think they don't care what norms he burns down. I don't think they care about what he does, as long as they get what they want. A vote for Trump is a narcissistic vote in every way, shape, and form. Now they lie to themselves and say, we're doing it for the good of the country. We've got to deal with this issue and that issue, and we've got to get this out of school and that out of school, and blah, 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 blah. So we're doing it for the country. They're not doing it for the country. They're doing it for themselves. They pin it on the country for the good of the country so that they feel better. And but as far as I will say this, I really don't think there's hardly anybody that is not aware of his crimes. There are a few that are brainwashed who truly believe he is totally innocent. Those people need to be tranquilized, put in a rubber room, and given professional mental health support, because they are truly broken mentally. Anybody with a working brain can look back 50 years, and everything's on the internet. If they can't figure out the internet, go to a library. His words have been public for 50 years. Everybody knows who he is, and there's too much evidence. So they know what he is, they know what he's done, and they don't care. And they'll blame it on the price of a gallon of milk. But again, if anybody with a working brain can go shopping, I do all the shopping in our household. Just the way our work schedules are, I have a little more freedom, and I enjoy it. It's kind of a zen time, walk around and shop, and then I do most of the cooking because I really like cooking. I was a bachelor until later in life and got married late, and I just got used to cooking, so I really like doing all the cooking. So I buy the groceries, and I know
that would get you labeled as a beta,
right? Which is hilarious, which is absolutely hilarious to me. And I'm like, my wife, when she works from home sometimes during the week, and when I'm around, I like making her breakfast. I enjoy it. Or I take our son to school, and when I come home, I grab something and pick it up for her, because I like doing things for her. I mean, that's just a normal thing to do as a decent human being, and as a husband, and as somebody who loves their spouse. And they're like, oh, that's just beta. She should be serving you. I don't need to be served. I'm a grown up. I can put on my own clothes. I can make my own food. I don't want a servant. If I wanted a servant, I would hire a butler. I don't need that. If you're so self-absorbed that you think a woman has to serve you, I mean, man, you're 12 years old. Did your mom not raise you right? I just don't get it. I mean, when I was 12, I was doing my own laundry. My mom was like, "You're old enough to do your laundry. There it is. Let me show you how to do it." And that was it. And okay, fine. But that's a whole nother subject. But my point was, anybody who goes to the grocery store right now can look and see what a gallon of milk is, and it's not too high. I bought eggs last week for $1.80 for a dozen. I bought milk for, I think, $2.12. And grocery prices have come down. Were they high? Absolutely. Are they still higher than they should be? Absolutely. And the reasons for that are predictable and easy to understand. When you have a pandemic that is badly managed and the economy crashes, for 18 months, and the government has to print money to keep people afloat so people don't starve to death and everything doesn't burn down, you're going to have inflation. That's normal. And then the government has to work to remove money from the system to bring inflation down and have different policies, and that takes time. When COVID happened, economists were predicting clearly we will have inflation for 2 to 3 years and then it will drop. They were clear. The policies that Biden had, whether anybody likes Biden or not, the policies worked because he followed the experts' advice. And this was all predictable. This is high school economics, but they make an excuse of it and say, oh, gas is just too high. You know what? Gas isn't too high because of that. There's a lot of other reasons. You look at people talk about the price of gas. Where I live, I just bought gas for $2.39 per gallon. My buddy who lives in California had to pay, I think he said $3.90, or I think a couple weeks ago he said it was $4.12. That price being high is not because of the government. That price is high is because the state government has taxes that are higher than everybody else's. And if you're too dumb to realize that state taxes account for most of the price shifting in gas, well, Brett, buddy, you probably shouldn't be voting because you can't really grasp the concept of basic math, basic policy. I mean, I'm not trying to be mean. Of course I can vote. But if you can't grasp that simple fact, then, man, find somebody that can explain it to you. Grab a passing fifth grader and let them tell you. You know what I mean? So they know who he is and they make an excuse. They don't care. They are telling you all these things that are excuses. They're not real. Oh, we don't like girls in sports. Okay. You want to talk about the societal and cultural changes around transgender people? Argue about it all you want. And there's going to be a million different viewpoints about that. You're governed by two things. One is the realization that they are human beings. And then if you cannot treat them as Christ would, you need to shut up. If you cannot treat them the way that Christ would treat a person, whether you like them or not, stay out of the conversation. But second, the realization that there is hardly anybody doing that. We're talking about the percentage being so low, and they've made it into an issue that doesn't really exist. Or they talk about, well, there's a book in the library and it's bad. Kids nowadays are reading the stuff that my kids read in high school. What they were reading as a ninth grader was the stuff I read in university. The world has changed. Kids are being given a fire hose of information, and they have matured far faster. Are there subjects that there are valid challenges to? Sure, make valid challenges. If there's really something that's an issue, go through the process. But trying to take over a school board because you're trying to totally strip the library and you're trying to take out everything you find offensive to your faith, you're in a public school. That public school serves the public, not your faith. Stay out of it. You see what I'm saying? And they make everything an excuse. They make everything an excuse. They find one, and if you look at all the libraries, you look at all the books they're griping about, it starts off, well, there's one book we don't like. Okay, let's go through the process. Let's talk about it. And then the next thing you know, they're taking out every book by Maya Angelou. Why? Well, there's a reason why. They don't want to admit the reason why. We don't want people, they're taking out books about the Tulsa Race Massacre. They're taking out books about Red Summer. Why are you taking them out? Oh, they're offensive. No, they're not offensive. You don't want your kids to know the history of what we did to other people. And so you're trying, well, we just have to protect them. No, you don't. If those kids are old enough to get shot at in a school because you are unwilling to make reasonable changes to the way guns are handled in America, they are old enough to learn about how fellow citizens destroyed entire communities. And they have to excuse everything Trump does to have a reason to push all this stuff. He is their cover. He is their tool. And so they ignore him. They ignore everything. They ignore it intentionally so they can push their societal agenda. And I'm going on
Yeah, this is much longer of an episode than we normally. That's okay. Don't apologize. This is a good conversation. So I want to wind up with this question here. I have several more, but I'm going to wind up with this one.
Okay.
And this is a complex one. So I need you to. I'll have to recite it slowly.
Okay.
So which historical figure do you think America needs the most in 2024? And I'm going to give you a list of 5 people.
Okay.
I want you to
write these down so I don't forget them. So go ahead.
Okay. All right. Martin Luther King Jr.
Okay.
Abraham Lincoln.
Okay.
C.S. Lewis.
Okay.
Dietrich Bonhoeffer,
Okay.
Rich Mullins.
Oh man. Wow.
I wanted to give you something to really have to think about. So
Oh,
these are
that is-
historical figures that you think America needs the most in 2020.
Okay. Okay. Let me ask you this. I'm just going to throw the question back. Are we talking about that America needs the most, or will listen
Well,
to
the church needs the most, I guess.
the church? Okay, the church needs the most. Ooh.
American church, American Christians.
Oh man. Okay. I'm sorry. I have to give you two answers.
Okay.
I think they need Bonhoeffer and they need Rich Mullins. I think Rich Mullins, oh man, do I miss him? I mean, if we had 1,000 Rich Mullins now, the world would be a different place. Oh man, do we need him? We need him.
Listen to a lot of his music this week. I can tell you.
I'm with you. I get it. Oh man, do we need him back? We need Rich Mullins in the American church to show us how to love people. And we need Bonhoeffer to show us how to live that love sacrificially. I have to say it's both of them. I can't name one. I just can't do it. C.S. Lewis, terrific. C.S. Lewis is, I mean, of course, is rightly feted as one of the best theologians of the 20th century and somebody that every Christian should read for foundational knowledge. Absolutely. Abe Lincoln, yeah, we need a strong leader. Sadly, the American church doesn't have one right now, and a political figure isn't one that it needs. MLK is never someone that should be put aside. And the thing is, though, his message is so well known. I think if we could somehow resurrect MLK, it would be wonderful. But I think the church would kill him again. I think Christians would kill him again in a heartbeat. I think they would absolutely. He wouldn't last a week in Trump's America. Absolutely. I hate to say that, but his message was too direct. It was too easy to grasp. You know, you look at his speeches and what a wordsmith, but he was always accessible. And his message now would get him killed in a week. He wouldn't last a week at all. I think if Jesus came right now, I think if Jesus reappeared and said, man, things are out of control. Sin is so bad. I'm just going to have to come down and do this all over again. I think somewhere, some mega church would kill him within a week. His message would not last. I had no doubt in my mind at all. And I know that's harsh to say, but there is no question. They couldn't tolerate his message now. They just couldn't do it because it would fly in the face of everything they have done for the last 9 years. It would fly in the face of everything they profess. I don't think he would make it either. They would have him on the cross in 2 days, no question. But yeah, Rich Mullins to show us how to love, because there was nobody that knew how to love like Rich Mullins. That man exuded love and acceptance. He exuded decency, and he demonstrated to an entire generation just how grand the love of God is and how we can respond in kind, and how we respond in kind not just to God but to our fellow man. And then Bonhoeffer gave us the example of lived sacrifice. We focus so much on his message of cheap grace. We forget that what he lived wasn't an issue of expensive grace. What he lived was sacrificial in every way. It wasn't just an issue of grace because he couldn't give grace. It's God that gives grace. Christ is where our grace comes from. But he was willing to sacrifice everything about him, his ministry, his personal life, everything for the sake of other people. And he was willing to be that example, even though it cost him everything. And again, that is reductive. There's a lot to Bonhoeffer there we can discuss. But I think I have to say both of them. There's no way to do just one. None.
Not for me. I appreciate that. And as a way of sort of wrapping up this conversation, I would encourage anyone, whether you know who Rich Mullins is or not, to go to YouTube and look up some of his videos. And generally, unless they're studio recorded versions, it's generally him at a piano talking to a room full of people before he starts to sing.
Go ahead. Sorry. Go ahead. I was like, did you ever see the video of him and Oh man, now my brain's it was him and Phil Keaggy, with a guitar and Rich Mullins playing on the piano, and it was,
I didn't see that.
I think it's on YouTube. I think the last time I saw it was on YouTube, but it makes you feel like you're in the ante room to heaven.
Wow.
I mean, it's especially for a music fanatic, But it's just
there's a movie on Prime that I watched a few years ago about Rich Mullins' life. If you haven't seen that, I would encourage you to watch it. I don't remember what it's called though.
Okay, I'll look it up. I haven't. I didn't even know they made a movie. I'll definitely look that up. Definitely.
Okay.
This is a total piece of trivia. I was living overseas and came home to visit my family for it wasn't Christmas. What was it? It was earlier in the year because he died. Didn't he die in August?
It was during the summertime. I remember that part.
Anyway, they lived just a few miles from where he was going to perform. And when he died and they had that accident, their house was like 2 miles away from that. Wow. And the next morning we heard a local pastor called and told us what happened. And I left right after that to go back overseas. That's just total trivia, total trivia. If I had known that he was going to be performing, I would have gone. I mean, personally, but we need voices like that. We need people willing to demonstrate Christ. And right now we have them, but there's not enough. And we just need more of them. That's all I can say. We just need more people to demonstrate Christ. And you cannot demonstrate Christ through a political policy. You cannot demonstrate Christ through a vote. You cannot demonstrate Christ through a culture or societal expression or opinion. You can only demonstrate Christ through your lived example and through the gospel. And we just need people like that are willing to demonstrate Christ. So anyway, that's my rant.
That's a good benediction here to end this conversation. So our guest today has been pastor and social media influencer. We'll call you Bonhoeffer's child. Bon, thank you so much for joining me today. I've enjoyed this conversation.
No, thank you. I have enjoyed it so much. It's nice, and I'm sorry if I went off on different tangents, but it is nice sometimes just to have someone I can talk to and go on, and your questions were amazing. This is excellent. I really appreciate it. It was a wonderful time.
Thank you. So if you're new here, please subscribe and follow this podcast so that you never miss an episode, and please share it with a friend. I'd greatly appreciate that. That's it for this week's episode of Stories from Real Life. Join us again next time for another great storytelling journey. Until then, don't forget to shine your light wherever you go.
That was Stories from Real Life. Join us again next week for another great storytelling journey. See you next time.